Welcome, everyone, to this very first session of our shiny, new, expanded Sustainable House Day program. My name's Anna Cumming, and I'll be your MC tonight for a discussion on the principles of sustainable design and where to start. It's the first of 4 in our Sustainable Design 101 series, in which we're going to be getting back to basics to help equip more people with the knowledge and confidence to build or renovate sustainably. We have people tuned in from all over the country today, from a wide variety of different traditional lands. I'm speaking from the traditional country of the Dja Dja Wurrung people in central Victoria, and I acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So I'm the editor of Sanctuary Modern Green Homes magazine, published by Renew, the organiser of Sustainable House Day. I have a long-standing interest in sustainable, energy-efficient and comfortable homes that tread lightly on the earth, and I really love being part of the mission to inspire and educate people about the design strategies, materials and systems available to achieve them. In Sanctuary, we try to cover all bases, providing deep dives into sustainable design topics without assuming too much knowledge on the part of our readers. In this session, though, and the rest in the series, we'll be starting right at the beginning. Tonight, what is sustainable design anyway, and where should I start? I'm joined tonight by 3 terrific panellists who not only bring formidable knowledge and experience, but also share my enthusiasm for spreading the word about sustainable design. If you'd all like to turn your cameras on, it'd be great if you could join me. Firstly, we have Jane Hilliard, the director at Designful in Hobart. Hi, Jane.
Hello.
A practice that specialises in environmentally sound small builds. Designful's approach to energy efficiency and sustainability is based around balance, specifically finding the right balance between values, size, resource use, environmental impact, financial impact, and residents' wellbeing. Designful's lovely off-grid house in Golden Valley in northern Tasmania, featured on our cover back in issue 55. Kind of want to live there. We also have Jenny Edwards, whose house I would also quite like to live in, the director and lead scientist at Lighthouse Architecture and Science in Canberra, an interdisciplinary company focused on smaller, smarter, sustainable homes, particularly retrofits and renovations that make the most of existing housing stock and prioritise energy efficiency and thermal comfort. Jenny is also a regular contributor to Sanctuary. Hi, Jenny.
Hello.
And finally, Nigel Bell is joining us. Nigel is an experienced architect who works from the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, often dealing with old housing stock, so homes with great character but unsuitable for the climate, for clients with low budgets but great ideas. He's familiar with a wide range of housing types, materials, energy efficiency upgrades and more. He's also expert in designing for bushfire-prone areas and is currently working with Renew as part of our Green Rebuild Toolkit update project. Hi, Nigel.
Hi there.
Okay, let's get started. During our discussion tonight, I'll be putting viewers' questions to our panel. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions during the registration process. You can also put questions into Zoom's Q&A window at the bottom of your screen as we go. We'll get to as many of them as we can in the time we have available. You can use the chat window to make general comments or to contact our behind-the-scenes team if you have any technical problems. Sustainable House Day is generously sponsored by Natters, Design for Place, Your Home, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, Sonnen and Lighthouse Architecture and Science. We thank them all for their support. And just to let everyone know that this session is being recorded. That's all the housekeeping. Let's get into it. So what is sustainable design and why pursue it? Who'd like to kick me off with that question?
Okay, it's not dealing with the past and the way we've grown up with houses of varying inefficiency. It's the response to climate change, which is happening well and truly now, be it the current floods, the rains, it has been the Black Summer bushfires, of which unfortunately we're going to get more mega fires in future years in bushfire-prone areas. We are now paying society-wide the consequences of inaction. So to keep it simple, our houses have to do better than ever before. we need the comfort, we need the feeling of homefulness, suspense. We need all those qualities into the future, but we need to look ahead at where we're going, not just thinking it's what we grew up with.
Absolutely. And I would add to that, we need, in line with that, is health and safety is basically what we're talking about, the climate resilience to keep us safe and healthy, and to tread lightly and minimise our impact on the environment around us. Yeah.
So what is that in terms of a house, in terms of a home? What is sustainable design that meets those goals to tread lightly on the earth? What do you think?
I think one of the things there's so many things we can do to be sustainable, but one of them I think is considering using resources and energy, or only using the resources and energy that our planet and our future generations can support. So we think about things like that can, come into a lot of decision making from the very start to well into the end of the process of building or renovating.
So that's energy efficiency, using as little energy as possible, material efficiency,
size,
thermal comfort without with minimal heating and cooling.
And to coin the phrase of my friends at Pod in Cairns, people-oriented design, the least house necessary, the least house you need, and what you do build has to perform well. And those things aren't hard to achieve, is the other thing we want to stress. We should be thinking about them, but we can do them.
And can I add that we've also got to look at ways of minimising our impact in terms of location, because the greenie ideal has always been to find that fantastic ideal site in perfect nature. There's too many of us. And if you're truly being sustainable, we're looking at the 9.9 million houses already built across Australia, and we're looking at retrofitting them to look for the next 20 or 50 years as being the biggest design challenge, compared to selecting your wonderful bushland site and then effectively cutting it off from nature forevermore for our own pleasure and our own lifestyle. We need to be modest, as has been suggested by Jenny, and we need to consider that the most sustainable house is that's already been built and that we can convert and improve and look 20 to 50 years ahead.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think an important point is also that ties in with that, Nigel, is flexibility of design, adaptability of design so that a house can continue to be of use to its occupants into the future, even if their needs change. So going hand in hand with that is designing for longevity, not for fashion.
Absolutely.
I mean, 20, 30 years ago, the jargon was long life, loose fit. Exactly that.
Yep. That's another way of saying the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is. You're using materials that have had a consequence to the world in production. We can talk about that more if you want to. But once we used it, we have to use it to the max. And not just use fashion to throw it out and replace everything every, limited number of years.
Yeah, and that flexibility of use, Anna, is something we're doing a lot combined with our retrofits. We're taking a lot of these larger houses that were built in the 70s or 80s when they started to get much bigger and converting them into two houses in one, or larger family homes that have the potential to split into two houses in one. We're just completing a terrific one at the moment. And we've done that a few times. And if we do build new, but increasingly we're focused on renovations, but when we do build new, we encourage clients to pursue that too. So again, a small house still can have the potential to divide into two residences or host, two family groups on one site. Is really important that we start thinking about that higher density.
Yes, I mean, I was talking just before we started here about my daughter's house, which was, she bought a 1970s 4-bedroom house. She only needed 2 bedrooms.
Yeah.
Because by looking at the floor plan, I could see you could easily cross a brick wall, concrete slab floor, metal roof. You could put a fire separated wall with a door in case it's for me in my old age. And there's 2 rooms. which in her case, she can rent to university students, and she halves her rental stress, halves her mortgage stress, because the ridiculously large 4-bedroom becomes 2 efficient 2-bedroom houses, and it saves her all kinds of hassle in terms of mortgage price rises. It's that point of design where you look at a property, and all of us on panelists and Anna know it, that you look at a property and you see some things are difficult, some things can easily be achieved. And so, that's part of the selection process. If we're looking at renewable, we're looking at sustainable, we're looking at modest, we're looking at ways of increasing densification so that people have access to services, schools, work, all those things, rather than just keep on spreading across the countryside.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads neatly into my next question, Nigel, which is about, what should people consider when they're selecting a site for their new build, say, or choosing a house to buy, in terms of location, orientation? I mean, what immediately springs to my mind based on what you said is considering the walkability of the neighbourhood, or how living there will fit in with your getting about in the world and your ability to use public transport. Getting back to the idyllic greenfield, bush site that you might love to live in, you may find that you drive a lot more than you thought you would, or than you needed to in your previous house. So that's something to consider. What else is there to consider? What should people consider when they're selecting a site or choosing a house, and how does that change in different climate zones around Australia? Big question. Jane, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. I definitely think thinking about your lifestyle you wish to lead is a very first thing to consider.
Yep.
And some of those things that Nigel was talking about before, with the amount of vegetation on it, there's lots of things that will come with that, and lots of things with a site that could increase your costs. But I think one of the biggest ones, if we're talking about sustainable design, is orientation and access to sunshine would be probably one of the really first things to consider, because we can use the sun to really for our benefit, to keep our homes warm, or if we need to, also considering the sun keeping them cool. So I did start my career working in far north Queensland, in a tropical climate. And now I'm in Tassie, so I've had both ends of the spectrum, but the same kind of thinking still applies. I think it's about, when we're looking at site, is what is available here, what are the natural resources, the lay of the land, the climate, how can I use them to my advantage, and what is it offering? So yeah, I think number one is orientation.
Yeah. And I always like to say, I always agree completely. You always think about where the sun is, but I want to stress to people that doesn't mean you have to get that perfect east-west, long axis east-west, so you've got maximum to the north. We work on every block and every type of orientation, and Anna knows, she's been to my house. My little block is long and skinny and faces directly north to the street. You can still, if you're aware of that when you're designing a house, you can still make the most of it. So don't confine yourself to thinking you have to find the perfect block. You can often make other orientations work well.
Yeah, the key there is just being aware of making the most of whatever the orientation of your block is. And, I see so many houses that are just built to face the street, wherever the street is. And it makes me sad, because there's so many of them could work so much better from a passive thermal point of view. And by passive thermal, for getting back to basics, I mean that making the most, so allowing winter sun in and blocking hot summer sun when you don't want it, in order to passively heat the house in winter and avoid it overheating in summer, keeping it shaded in summer. And that's a fundamental of passive solar design, which is one of the main sort of sustainable design strategies. And I interrupted myself in the middle of a sentence there, but
Okay.
Yeah, the key thing is to make sure that you consider where the sun is, whichever side of the block that is.
Showing my longevity, way back in the 70s, early 80s, my then professor, John Ballinger, who was the one who started NATAs and energy efficiency, et cetera, they set up the GMI Council, glass mass insulation. And the point of that is passive solar design, which we in Australia, we have a wonderful climate for passive solar design in most cases, not all, not high tropical north, but certainly in the temperate zones. And that is the predominance of glass facing north, because we're in the southern hemisphere. Okay, predominance of glass. You still need a bit to across ventilation, etc., but predominance to the north. You need thermal mass, ideally, in that you've got bricks, you've got a concrete slab, you've got materials that will hold the warmth or the cool, depending on where you are in the season. And the third aspect is insulation, which is the cheapest of all three. Always add more insulation wherever you can in nearly all Australian climates south of the tropics, because glass mass insulation, northern orientation, can actually give you thermal comfort without having to put in the air conditioner, the wood heater, things
unless you live in Tassie or the ACT.
Even there, it's not impossible, it's just harder. And even in those more extreme climates, you can absolutely reduce the amount of active heating and cooling that you, or heating that you need by a lot.
Huge.
Yeah.
So typically our homes use 20% of a typical Canberra home. So it's a massive reduction. Yeah.
Which is massive financially as well, especially as energy costs are going up and up. And I think we missed a point about sustainability when we were discussing what sustainability was at the beginning. We're not just talking about environmental sustainability here. We're also, when we're talking really good design, we're also talking financial sustainability, social sustainability, various other kinds of sustainability. And that's kind of, you can't really separate those.
They all go together.
Yeah.
One of those things about a block, and it's something that we're in Tassie experience a lot, is there's a lot of rural or bush blocks around. Now, one thing I think was very important is to really do really good due diligence on the overlays, planning overlays, code overlays, potential biodiversity overlays on a potential block. Because that can really impact on your process moving forward. It can really impact on your available budget. So the more complexities your site has, the potentially that's going to suck up some more of your budget before you've even done anything. And that is, I think, a really big thing to get some advice on potentially, because planning schemes for people that don't work with them every day can be extremely overwhelming and hard to understand. And even though you find out, oh, it's got a biodiversity overlay on this block, for example, what does that actually mean for you? What does that mean? What's my process going to mean? How's that going to affect what I can potentially design, and how is that going to affect my budget? I see that happening a lot. You buy this block and then find out all this stuff. Oh, I'm going to have to do that and means this. And it can start to become really overwhelming and really eat into your budget. So due diligence on what's happening with your block is, I think,
before you buy it.
Yeah, before you buy it.
Yeah.
Can I say before you buy your block?
Before you buy it.
Yes.
Because okay, I live in the most bushfire-prone part of Australia, Blue Mountains, and there is too little official data, but it does show if you're going up the BAL level, bushfire attack level, by the time you're at BAL 40, without trying to explain too much, you could be adding $100,000 or $150,000 to your standard building cost. If you are in flame zone, you could be adding $250,000 to your building costs. So certainly in my part of the world, bushfire and the regulations which are mandatory are hugely expensive if you're near the edge of the bushland, and particularly if you've got steep steep topography nearby, within 100, 140 meters. In many cases, there are people who then cannot afford to build or cannot afford to renovate because of the hugely increased cost of building. And you have no choice if you happen to live in bushland, close to bushland, where there's steep vegetation.
And sort of following on from that, but sort of changing tack a bit, in the more urban environment, I find classic examples where clients will come to us looking for a house to renovate. And again, you've got to think about orientation, but you've got to think about your easements and your side setbacks and those planning regulations, because a lot of people, and the big trees, the protected trees on a site, and how they can, we love trees and we want to keep as many trees as possible, but they can really bugger things up from a solar passive perspective if they're not deciduous and they're in the wrong location. So we've had many times where clients have contacted us saying, we're looking at this house, and had a look at it and said, oh, no, there's all sorts of really big issues for that block for these reasons, be aware. So yeah, we don't want to terrify you all, but we would just want to let you know it is good to get some expert advice early on in that.
And on the flip side of that, Jenny, if people are looking for a house to buy and retrofit or renovate as opposed to a new build, what are some of the things they can look for as opposed to look to avoid?
So again, look for that good solar access. So, there are, fortunately, about a quarter of the houses, or maybe closer to a half, have decent orientation. So they are getting some of that lovely northern sun into the living areas. So look for that. If you can find a place that's already got that, it means the degree of renovation or rejigging you're going to have to do will be a lot smaller. Yeah. The trees is another big one, particularly in older established suburbs. So they're beautiful street trees through parts of Canberra, and old protected trees that are magnificent, but they can really limit what you can do on a block and impact on that solar gain. So they're I've sort of forgotten the question, Hannah, but did I cover something?
What to look for if you're looking for a house with retrofit potential, like to make it really, really sustainable and really great? Here
in Canberra, a lot of our housing stock is fairly similar. So most of them are brick veneer houses, tiled roofs. A lot of the stuff from the 60s and 70s is really solid here in Canberra. So I reassure people, because there's plenty of people in the building industry who like to tell people that they're not worth holding on to, that they just should be demolished. So I'm here to reassure people that a lot of those older houses actually have really great bones. They're just missing the insulation and the air tightness and the better glazing and the better use of orientation often. So I would actually encourage people to assume there's more potential in the houses they're looking at than they probably realise.
Provided that it's solid and in good condition.
But don't be terrified about cracks in brickwork, everyone, because particularly in Canberra, you will always get cracks in brickwork. We're sitting on clay here, so that's generally nothing too much to worry about.
Can I?
So let's have go ahead, Nigel.
The other aspect is where our participants are from. Because as we discussed earlier, us three are all in cold or cool temperate areas. ACT, Tasmania, and myself in Blue Mountains. Because what we're talking about, passive solar design, works for temperate climates, which is the predominance of Australia. But if you're listening in from Northern Queensland or Northern Territory or Northern WA, the sustainable argument is somewhat different. Because you're dealing with heat and humidity the way us three aren't. I don't know if we can ask a raise of hands or Anna, or how we can find out if there's anyone, but if you're dealing in tropical areas, what you need is airflow first and foremost. You've got to look at condensation. Where does that high humidity, where's the cold surface that it sits on? And I mean, in our climate, it's a single glazing, and if you live in a southern part of Australia, you will see the water running off the condensation inside your building, sitting on the windowsill inside. If you're in Northern Australia, it's a bigger issue, because you don't want to actually have major condensation on all your solid walls you're going to have to consider about how you can fully ventilate, and less insulation, more cross flow, more fans, things to reduce the effective climate temperature and minimize the humidity. So different climates, different solutions to be sustainable.
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
in those more tropical, much warmer climates as well, vegetation can be an excellent resource as well. So positioning plants are natural kind of climate controllers. So by positioning them in a place that will help, it will cool your home for you. So they're very powerful. Thinking about where on your property is going to be the best place to have a wonderful garden that is going to do that work for you. So yeah, it's sometimes not always about the actual building itself, but what's happening around it, what you're opening up to, what are the prevailing winds and breezes in that area. Is there any, water close by and things like that? So that's something that I could suggest for hot places as well.
Or all places. I mean, I'm sure we all do it in our design too. That we always say to people that landscape design it's critical that you think about that with your building design, because that's how you create a sustainable sanctuary. And thinking about where those in the ACT we use a lot of deciduous plantings, and my front pergola's got deciduous grapevines on it, which provide this lush green oasis to relax under over summer, but completely allow the winter sun to flood in. And that lovely connection that Jane and Nigel are the architects here. I'm the scientist, but that beautiful connection that the architects will create between the indoors and the out, that allows you to keep the house small but feel connected to outside and leaves you space to create a garden. For example, I'm on a 400 square metre block, but I've got masses of garden around my house. By keeping the house small, it doesn't feel small. It feels like I've got lots of lovely space.
So let's talk about size. How should I decide how big I need my house to be and make it sustainable? What should I be taking into account? How should I be doing it?
I think the very first thing to start with is your values as a person. I know that might sound not very about houses, but that's what I do with all my clients from the beginning. If you can spend some time thinking, what are my values? How do I want to live? And what's important to me? Let that drive. What does my house need to do to support that lifestyle? So I don't think at an early stage you actually need to know how big. Maybe it's not quite the right question to be asking yourself, how big does my house need to be? That is professionals are going to help you determine that. But what you really do need to consider is what's important to me, what are my values, how do I want to live? And, then let that drive what is enough house for you. Yeah. So it might not arrive at the very beginning. I wouldn't say, I want my house to be, say, 100 square meters. It's considering what has to happen in it. What do I need? And what would be excess, or what there'll be a list of things that you think, I think I should have these in my house, but that might not necessarily be actually important for you.
Yeah, there's I think a lot of people fall into the trap of building what they think the market will want when they resell their house at some point in the future. And as opposed to building what is going to work for them.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Australians build the biggest project homes now in the world.
Yeah.
Like 280 square meters is apparently an average.
That's average, yeah.
Western Sydney and probably Western Melbourne, over 400 square meters on tiny blocks of land with dark roofs, with tiles, everything that is wrong for climate in terms of tons of weight up above, which is superheated through summer. And you can't get through breeze because you're so close to
so
side.
close to the next one. And no space for eaves because that would remove desirable internal space. I mean I've heard it said many times, and I think it's very true that the first fundamental step in sustainable design is just building less in the first place.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Because you use less material that way. You also create less volume of house to heat and cool. and clean and maintain and pay for in the first place.
Absolutely. It's a
Right.
win-win. And there's a
Yeah,
reason, I always said about, there's a reason why most of us really enjoy going away and staying in a little cabin or staying in a caravan park or staying.
Yeah.
We actually like, I mean, those places aren't particularly well designed, but we still enjoy the change. Living in a smaller space that's well designed is lovely. It's really, really lovely. And I think one of the problems in Australia is that most people don't get to experience that. They only get to go to display villages full of these monstrous, poorly designed spaces with houses with all this dead space and excess. And I think that's what I have to aspire to. That's why during Sustainable House Day, we have to open up and people have to come and visit the alternative, see what's possible.
And Michelle on the chat line just pointed out the whole benefit of the small house movement, which is exactly that. And I point out, I love Scandinavia. I've been there a number of times with friends, etc. How their average house is about 78 square meters. And if
for a family.
if you go to IKEA, go to their little rooms of 30, 35 square meters and show how they can actually make beautiful, well-designed, livable space, affordable and compact. That should be the principle that we're working to, as to think from thinking bigger is better. It's not. not
So what are the fundamental design strategies for achieving that, for achieving a smaller house that still meets the needs of a family, say?
In some of my research,
lifestyle,
and also looking at in our range of homeful designs, a little bit of a rule of thumb, if people want it, is we've found that about 30 square meters per person is, in our kind of lifestyle, is sufficient. So if you've got a, thinking about that, and so, and also just back on that market, what does the market want? I think we need to be thinking about what the future wants, not what the market is telling us that we need to have for resale or value, or what real estate agents think has value. We need to be shifting our attention to what does the future need. And the other thing is that we have an aging population, we have a dwindling household size. So our households and the amount of people that need to live in the houses isn't as big as it used to be. It's heading fast to, 1 or 2 people. So I would reject that. Don't worry about that. Just thinking about, what do I need as a person or a family to support me to feel healthy and happy? And it's often not very, very much, because as Jenny said, a lot of us are escaping our lives to go on holiday and stay in a tent or a shack and to feel good. We can bring some of that freedom into our lives by not, aspiring to maybe have these big houses, which means it's going to cost more, which means we have to work more, which means we have less life to live and enjoy in them. So if we think about that hamster wheel, we don't have to subscribe to that hamster wheel.
Not at all. And I think it's wrong. They say that it's what people want, but it's not what people want. It's just all that's on offer. Our books are closed. There's so much demand for what we do, and we do much smaller than most architects in Canberra. There's huge demand. There just is. It isn't available. So don't believe, and real estate agents and project home builders, it's in their interest to keep perpetuating that idea. So don't believe it. There's a huge market. It doesn't matter. Again, you should always design for yourself. But if you do a smaller house, there is a market out there for it. If you do need to sell or move on, there'll be people who will lap it up.
Absolutely, and increasingly, because small house movement, more people aware of sustainability, frankly the change of government, putting new awareness about energy, about climate, about carbon consequence, all these external factors are flowing through the market. So yes, standard market nonsense, as I see it, just keeps reproducing the old, because that's where the maximum profit is in the mass market. But the fact that you as participant, or we, are talking about it, that's not you or us. You are obviously looking far more sensibly, more knowledgeably, more sustainably. And what Jane and Jenny have said is absolutely spot on. Go for what you need, minimize, look ahead, think of consequence, and you have a big advantage both in terms of the size of your mortgage or your loan, and then you minimize your operational living cost, so you can do all the other things in life that we all want to do.
And to be honest, the houses that always excite me the most when I'm looking for projects to feature in Sanctuary are the ones that use space in multifunctional ways really cleverly. And I think that's probably top of my list for cleverly reducing the overall size of the house that you need, is by, don't have a guest room that sits there as a guest room and nothing else, and only gets used every so often. Have a multifunctional space that can accommodate guests and also function as a separate living space when the kids have friends over, and and it can be a sewing space and a study space and a storage space and everything else. And there was a house that we profiled recently where their living room had a retractable wall between it and the kitchen, so that it could be made into a guest room. And the kitchen dining area was big enough that it could also function temporarily as a living room when the main lounge was a guest room. And that was so clever. And it was a very small house, but it had so much flexibility. And I just think that's a really key thing to consider if you're building or renovating. Yeah.
All of our house designs have what we call a multi-room that serves those multiple functions. So I'm in mine at the moment, which is my office, and also I like to think I'm going to have time to do art and craft, not so much lately. But it's got a good quality sofa bed, and so it's our guest room as well. And so good. That clever repurpose, multi-use of spaces, but also great storage is key to making smaller spaces work. And my dining room, I've got a study nook. My front kitchen dining area also has a study nook and a sitting area in it. And it's one room, and it performs those 4 functions really, really well. It's not big, and it's such a lovely space to be. So, rethink.
I was just thinking for everyone, a bit of a exercise that you could do to help with this is you can make a list of, these are my values in life. These are the functions in my life that contribute to those values, and then next to each of those functions you can put when do I do them and how much, and then you're going to see a bit of a profile of how you're spending your time in your house, and that could help you think about, well, what spaces could some of those functions be combined, how big do spaces that I'm doing those functions need to be. So sometimes putting something on paper or having it as a picture can really help you see it, rather than it be all in your head. Seeing it on paper and how you're spending your time and what's important to you can really help you understand what you need. If you want a little exercise to do, it's a great time at the very beginning to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Gender biases, in that I'll never forget the client that he wanted to study because he was into computer gaming and computer this, that, and everything else. It turned out when push came to shove, he wanted 28 PowerPoints.
20 PowerPoints?
28.
28?
Separate.
Oh my God.
For all his equipment, and his poor lady had a sewing corner. Now, to talk about gender equity, and
I hope you sorted that out, Nigel.
They know they become clients. They weren't my kind of people. And can I say that's actually another important aspect when you're selecting your consultant. You're going to be working with them for a year or maybe longer. Are they your kind of people? Are you on the same wavelengths? Because I can tell you now, it's hard work if they're not, because you'll have all these points of friction and to think from, as Jane is saying, resolve in advance. What are you after? What are your value systems? What are your goals? And as Jenny is saying, look at how you can combine them. You don't need room.
Yeah.
Look at how you can minimize space and how you can socially interact with, family, friends, whoever it might be. These are very important points that reduces your building footprint, reduces your cost, and actually makes for a more sociable, sustainable lifestyle. All good.
Another one is, think about, there's a lot of things that you might have value wise and function wise, think about what the things could be done outside, because sometimes when we focus on renovating or building a house, we get very focused on inside space, but we forget about this amazing resource and thing that's going to bring a lot of value to our lives, that is going to make us feel better, that's already out there. So I would go as far as thinking about, I mean, at home, I have an outdoor kitchen and I've designed those kind of spaces for people. And that brings, you know, so much connection with their climate and environment and their garden. If you're someone who really wants to have a pumping, productive garden, being as close to that whenever you can might really be making the most of that. So I'd be considering also, what can you do outside? If you want your thinking about things like spaces for children to play, does that need to be inside? Does it you need a play toy room? Can't that action be done outside, and you spend some energy and time and some of your budget on making brilliant outdoor spaces for your children, maybe?
Totally. We often do our carports and think of them as extensions of the outdoor space, you know, back the car out and they're a lovely undercover play space in whatever weather conditions. So yeah, really good point to think about that external space as well. It can really extend your living space. It's all living space.
Well, we're lucky in Australia, in most places, we do have such equitable climates. You know, we all have those wonderful days and wonderful weeks where we want to be outdoors. So as was mentioned early on, the indoor-outdoor relationship is so fundamental. So whether Jenny's got a fantastic garden, whether Jane has chooks and things running around, where I've got lots of...
Yeah, got a few.
It's connecting with your friends, your family, your kids, the plants world and nature, because we're given so much here in Australia, much more than, frankly, most other countries in the world. We need to use it positively without broader detriment. That's what we're all on about.
And connecting with your neighbours too. That's one of the things I really notice here, that because my house does face the street to the north, we've got a front courtyard. So I talk to people walking up and down their street with walking their dogs, whereas the other houses in my street have put all their living areas on the southern side of the house. You never see the people, which is a real pity. So, yeah, we're missing out on a lot of social interaction by having these big houses that we hide in.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's what I meant by social sustainability that I mentioned before. Yeah, absolutely. So we've already dived into the next question that I was wanting to ask you, which was, what should I include in my list of goals for a sustainable home? So Jane's already talked about really nutting out your values and the lifestyle that you want your home to support. How do you want to live? What do you want to be able to do in the house? And for how much of the time do you want to be able to do each thing? Maybe if you have guests, if you really do have people visiting for half of the year, then you do need a proper guest suite. But most of us don't, I don't think. The inside-outside relationship and how you can blur the lines there, and how you can create outdoor living space that helps to avoid building more house and connects you to the outside. I would add probably the general style of the house that you're wanting to build or create or renovate into. Goals for energy efficiency or your Energy Star rating. I think budget is a very important thing to include in a goals list. And perhaps, I don't know, does anyone have anything specific to say about budget?
Well, I think it's important for clients to be honest with their designers about budget. And at the same time, we also understand, we've all experienced this, where clients come along and they don't know, and they've just plucked a nice round number out of the air, hopefully, you know, very optimistically often, particularly in the current market. You've got to be clear about whether that budget is a really strong line in the sand, or whether you are open to being presented with ideas that may cost a little bit more, but are going to be really cost effective in the long run. So it is important to have an understanding of how much money you do have to spend, because designers like the three of us are not out to spend all of your money. We're out to show you the most cost effective way to achieve a fantastic energy efficient lifestyle. But we will tell you the honest truth about how much stuff costs, because you need to hear it, and it can be a shock to some people.
I think that's why starting with your values and how you want to live is the best way to start, because how I explain it is you've got a brief. Most people have a brief, or it'll be a list of things that they need or want in the house, and there might be some wish list things packed in there as well, and then there's a budget. Most of the time we're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. So seriously, 99% of the time the briefs that we're working with are going to be bigger than what the budget is going to support. So and we have to get that brief to fit into the budget that you are. It might be a hard budget, or it might be a soft budget. You might be, and all different people have different levels of anxiety or nervousness around budget, and that's good to understand for yourself. So by starting with values and how you want to live, you're not going to set yourself up for disappointment or feeling like you're not getting things when it comes time to discuss what your budget is going to support. So I think budget's a very fundamental thing, and I completely understand that most people, if they haven't done this before, are not going to know how much things cost, and getting help and support from professionals in an early stage is a really good idea about that as well.
I agree absolutely, Jane, because building costs generally have risen around 25% since COVID, because we've got supply chain shortages of fundamental materials. Metal has gone up 42% in cost. We can't get timbers like we were a few years ago. Apparently most of our LVL actually came from Russia. Or most people knew. So suddenly there's no imports from Russia, quite reasonably, understandably, but it means that there is a major hole in the market for supply chain. Then, because we've relied as a country too long on imported skills under the 457 visas, where we'd get people coming in for a year or two and working as tradespeople who may or may not have full understanding of Australian standards. But we as a country have relied on that. They're not happening for the last few years, and the result has been, well, arguably catastrophic when it comes to controlling cost. At the same time, in certainly New South Wales and Victoria, previous governments have effectively decimated the TAFE training system, trade courses. There's hardly any good quality trade courses anymore. They're all handed over to private enterprise, which is money making, not after quality. So we've had a whole series of external factors affecting everyone's everyday building cost. So to support what Jane is saying, cost needs to be talked about up front, because that largely determine how the wish list may or may not be met. Or certainly my clients, they always have the multi-million-dollar aspirations, and yet the budget is right down. So time, cost, quality, the three ingredients you need to talk to your professional about. Time. Do you have to do it quickly? If you so, you'll pay more. If you can take your time, you'll get a better resolved, higher quality result. Cost. Well, as Jane said, is that absolute, or is there a little bit of flexibility in that? That will affect, are we designing to a budget, or we're designing to your ideas? They're different things. Then quality. If your quality of sustainable lifestyle is everything, then arguably you probably spend more time talking to Jane, talking to Jenny, talking to your professional to really nut down what you truly need, as distinct from what the market says or your distant family members say all about. Work out what you need, what you want, and go with it with good professional help.
One thing that I really understood talking with you three earlier before this webinar started was the distinction between a wish list or a goals list and an actual functional brief. I think getting that right, understanding the difference between those two things and getting it right is probably pretty important to a smooth process. rather than sitting and writing a list of what most lay people, I suppose, would consider to be a brief. Here's what I want, and then and as a starting point, and then taking it to a designer or an architect and saying, okay, I've got this much money and here's what I want. It sounds like what you're recommending people do, Jane, is to really put together more of a goals list, a values list, and take that with a budget to a designer for assistance with working those two items up into an actual design brief that can then inform the project.
Definitely. I would avoid attempting to write your own functional brief, because as professionals, we are used to dealing with the multiple incoming elements and pressures that have to be considered for it all to work, basically. So it's like playing a game of Tetris. There's all these different things that need to be considered. We talked before about your site. It might be in a high bowel area, which means that that's going to take up more of the budget, which means that your brief is going to have to shrink to if you are working within a fairly strict budget. Yes. So we work at work every day and have practice in balancing the elements. Yep. And that takes some discussing and collaboration. But if you've nailed your values and your goals, we work within them. So I just avoid trying to write a brief of this many bathrooms, a separate toilet, this bigger bedroom, blah, blah, blah.
A butler's pantry, a media room.
Because there's a whole lot of things that need to be considered before you even get to that point, to set that up well so that you can do that within your potential budget. There's a whole lot of stuff that needs to be considered first. And I would trust the professional that you choose to work with you to actually create your brief kind of with you and for you.
We actually ran a workshop over a decade ago now, it's 2011, with a big group of the public. No architects were allowed, apart from a few in our business. And we asked them, we really pushed them. They came along initially talking about rooms and numbers of bathrooms and things, but we pushed them. No, how do you want to live? What are the core things you're after? And we reached consensus with this group that it was light, warmth, good social spaces, and connection to outdoors. That's actually what everybody wanted.
And that's the end of the webinar, folks. We're done. That's a great result from that workshop, Jenny.
I mean, I get some wonderful stories about people's lives when we do this. It's just a joy to read, and I feel like I really get to know them and how they want to feel. And it comes down to where their morning. I like to have my morning coffee looking east. I want to know about those kind of things.
Yeah.
Because then I get to know who are you as a person, and what do I need to do to support you to achieve your goals. I'm particularly not really very interested in the tile you want. I will at some point maybe. But you're going to set yourself up to achieve your goals by really considering what they are. And I think some people just completely skip that point and get too involved in looking at tiles. It's really time well spent, I would suggest.
So what professionals do I need as a beginner in this space wanting to build or renovate a sustainable house? What professionals do I need, and how do I find good ones?
Don't start with a builder. Is one thing, particularly if you're renovating a house. It could be so tempting. Clients, or even a new house, people will go directly to the builder. It's like, you're several steps too far ahead. In fact, I did an article for Sanctuary or Renew, can't remember which, Sanctuary wasn't it, how to choose a green builder, but we actually then spun it around to say, wait on, before you get to the builder, you need to be looking at your design professionals. And of course, I would stress, because it's my background, is someone who does have an understanding of the energy efficiency, or maybe an energy assessor if you want some modelling done throughout the process. But don't go straight to a builder, because they're experts at building houses. They're not design experts. They're not energy efficiency experts. It can be a bit of a trick.
What do you mean by modelling, Jenny?
I mean, in my case, I do the NatHERS modelling, so the National House Energy Rating Scheme. Again, if you work with an assessor, I encourage you to try and find someone local who knows about your climate and knows about the local construction industry, and is genuinely interested in sustainability and energy efficiency. Like every profession, there are energy assessors that just churn out the bare minimum, but there are people like myself who are actually very interested in helping you optimise and helping, will work collaboratively with architects.
So when you're talking about energy assessors and energy modelling, just to recap for people who might not have come across this concept before, you're talking about professionals who can assess a particular design and come up with a sort of an answer on how well that house is going to perform and how energy efficient or how much energy it's going to need to run. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's a software package, and it's quite sophisticated. The output might look pretty basic, but it's quite sophisticated. It models the actual construction of the home for your particular climate zone, exact orientation, insulation specs, glazing specs, eave offsets and projections, you name it, to help you understand the overall energy performance of the home, but also enable you to look at how each room or zone of the house is performing. So it can give you a really good picture of what's going on. So that's something I always push or encourage people to do with their designers.
Can I agree? But can I say design has to come first?
Yes, well, yeah, absolutely.
You need your designer to come up with a concept based upon your goals, your understanding, your budget, all those things.
Totally.
And then whether you go to a building designer, whether you go to an architect, they hopefully are going to massage all the different wants and needs and come up with a package, a concept design, which is say, yep, that's what I want. Then we talk to people like Jenny. Then we talk at the matters assessment. Then we play with the combination of materials. We look at the size of the windows to different orientation. We look at the cross ventilation. That follows, but you must get the design correct up front, and then it's modified according to the science.
I always stress that you guys are the magicians. The architects are the magicians in this process, absolutely. And that the science, I say it's not rocket science, it's building science, and it's fairly basic building physics. But yeah, the magic and that livability and the functionality and that connection to outdoors is where the architecture.
I'd have to say that in terms of professionals, a building designer or an architect is probably the closest one you're going to be with. And I see, I consider myself as kind of like the project. Generally, we project manage it for you. So most building designers and architects, I think, are going to assist you in completing the rest of your team. So the consultants that you're going to need, people like Jenny that will look at the energy efficiency and modelling, your engineer, for example, to help you with deciding on who your preferred builder is. So I would think that's one of the very first ports of call. But before that, or as well as that, when we were talking about sites, blocks of land, which really are going to impact a lot on your project, depending on what you're dealing with. If you do have a slightly challenging site, or you might have bushfire overlays, biodiversity and other things, I'd also consider getting some feasibility initially done, which might mean a private planner or someone in that area happens first. And they're really going to assess the feasibility of what is the box within which you can work on this property, whether it's an existing house property or whether it's a new build site. So that's one that often you might not think of and can sometimes come in later, but I'd be considering trying to pull that to the front end, because that will draw your box within what you have got to work with. And then your designer, whether they're an architect or a building designer, will project manage the rest of your consultants, which there can be a few.
Can I say that, yes, I'm not disagreeing, but if an experienced architect will have already done a lot of work in terms of the whole range of issues that would affect that lot, if you're getting a local professional, you should always look for a local person with deep knowledge and understanding of approvals, of bushfire regulations, of tree removal or not. Go for a local person with experience and ask around. architects inherently have many more years of training in background than building designers, but we obviously charge more. We have a deeper knowledge at different levels, but that's maybe not what you need, because in many cases, if it's a relatively straightforward house, building designers will do exactly what you need and do it well. If you've got greater complexity, conflicts between different regulations, and or you've got a really, really challenging site, then yes, perhaps you do choose an architect. So it horses for courses. Great building designers out there. There's some crap architects out there. Find the right person for your needs in your area. Ask around, and particularly look at track record in terms of, you know, is there a project that you've come across that they've done that you think, wow, that's good, or you've heard that they
maybe one you've seen in Sanctuary.
Yes, they've negotiated through council and won the impossible approval. Look around and seek the right person out. And as I said earlier on, look at the values. In that, just as Jane said earlier, values are everything. So if someone came to Jane with a multi-million-dollar project, or me with a multi-million-dollar project, we probably wouldn't get on that well for that long. You know, it's people who share values. I'm an old socialist, so I will do great work for people with great ideas and low money. I don't make money, but that's me. You know, you find the person with the same values. If you're into bling, find the bling architect or the bling designer. If you're after something more wholesome and sustainable, go to Jane, talk to Jenny, talk to people like me in your local area.
Yeah, good advice.
I've also heard other architects and building designers recommend, in some cases at least, involving a builder early on in the design process, as a way of potentially keeping costs down as well. I know that a lot of builders and building designers and architects have builders that they've worked with before and like to work with and have relationships with. So yeah, I think I'd probably agree with whichever one of you said that, you know, finding an architect or a building designer that you can work with, that you know you're going to be able to work with productively, is probably the first step. And then, you know, that person is in many cases going to be very helpful in putting the rest of your team together.
Yeah.
But as you said, Anna, the local people, local designers probably know the local builders.
Yeah.
As we said earlier, don't go to them first. They follow.
Yeah.
They're going to work from the design, the specification, the drawings. They aren't the decision makers. It's between the designers, the approval, and all the documentation. They follow. So yes, by all means, once you've got a design, you know which windows you're going to use, you know the orientation, certainly talk to a builder, because most of them are signed up 6 months or a year or more ahead. So it's useful, but don't think it's a substitute for design. Don't think it's a substitute for building science.
No.
I would also say look for the local thing again, and the existing relationships. We'll often get builders involved in renovation projects where we think there's some complexity just to get their input, and I'm sure it's the same for Nigel and Jane, that we know the builders that are good to work with, who are good communicators and collaborators, and that's what you want. You know, you're giving these people a lot of money to do the most significant thing in your life, you know, your biggest single investment. So you want them to be good communicators. You want them to be really interested in going on this journey with you. You want them to be interested in sustainability and energy efficiency. So you want a good team player.
Absolutely. And if not a builder who's already experienced in sustainable buildings, at the very least one who's willing to learn and be guided by you and your architect and so forth, and not just dismiss or go behind your back, worst case scenario.
Right. Yeah. So there
not do the insulation properly.
Yeah, there are encouragingly some young builders coming through who are really interested in this space. So don't think you have to get an older experienced builder. There are, as Anna just pointed out, young builders who are keen to learn and keen to do this stuff well. As long as they're keen to communicate and collaborate and go be part of the team, that's great.
I guess I'd just like to stress that if you've already done a bit of work on your goals and values, it's very important to, I mean, the realm of sustainable design and building, I think, is very large, and there's lots of different pockets within it. So it is important to consider, well, what are my personal goals? For example, if you are very interested in, for example, passive house, probably heard of that. That's a particular kind of level of sustainability or design that I would specifically you'd want to talk to someone who is very passionate about that. Or say you are very interested in wanting to build a hemp house or a rammed earth house, for example, and that comes into your goals about materiality. You need to be asking your professional, are you passionate about that as well? Have you had experience in that? So just the word sustainability has a very broad capture, and there's different pockets within there, and it's wise to spend some time to understand, are your values and goals actually on the same page? Because sometimes, even if we're all trying really hard to be sustainable, there can be a mismatch in what is the actual goal that's trying to be achieved.
And can I add to that? The term sustainable has been misused for decades. You won't find a builder or an architect or a building designer who won't say, oh, of course I'm sustainable. Seek it out, as Jane is saying. Find out what their particular expertise, question them nicely. Find there's a project not looking like yours, but has some of the elements that responds to your values. So yeah, that's important.
Definitely.
I'm going to turn to some of our attendees' questions now, team.
Cool.
So the first one comes from Samantha, who asks, if rebuild isn't an option, where's the best place to start to renovate your home to be as sustainable as possible? For example, should we replace our windows first? Should we concentrate on air tightness first?
It's really a great question, and I'm glad that that questioner mentioned windows, because a lot of people think double glazing, that's where you start, and I think it's simply because you can see it. It sounds sexy, it sounds high tech, and you're going to see this new thing going, but it's not the place to start. The place to start is with the boring stuff that you can't see, that's going to have the biggest impact, and that's insulation and draft sealing. And that sounds very, very boring, but the bang for buck is huge, particularly with draft sealing. And while I mentioned draft sealing, I need to stress that that's different to ventilation. So making a house airtight, airtightness and ventilation are different things. They're both critical. You need to design for ventilation. We design for opening windows and to ventilate and exhaust moisture properly. Airtightness is getting rid of that random leakage in the structure. So for renovating houses, there's so much potential in Australian housing just to get a caulking gun and gap fill. The impacts are huge. And then insulating, start high, start in your ceiling, then into your walls. Here in the ACT, there are a couple of good suppliers that can retrofit insulation into walls. In Victoria, there are a couple. Tassie, it's a little bit trickier. Different parts of the country, it's harder and easier to access retrofit wall insulation, but check it out. And then subfloor insulation. So start high, draft ceiling and insulation from the top down to the bottom will give you big bang for buck in just about every climate. Bigger bang for buck in the colder climates, but it will help you in every climate.
I'll just also start considering electrifying, moving away from fossil fuel or gas.
We haven't talked about energy at all yet.
If you have the opportunity, or if you have the opportunity, not everyone can consider that at early stages, but with a retrofitting or renovation project, degassing could be also
totally. All of our reno projects, we're getting them off gas these days. On that note, maketheswitch.org.au, fantastic website, made here in the ACT, but useful all around the country, covers just about everything you need to know about getting off gas and planning for that transition. Because as Jane said, you can't necessarily do it all at once, but you want to have a plan in place so that when your gas hot water system dies, you're not sucked into installing a new gas hot water system. And slowly peg away at it and get rid of the gas, absolutely.
And also, can I add the point about getting rid of your wood heaters? I mean, it's traditionally been a lovely thing to do. We have a Jetmaster wood heater in our 1912 house. We use about 3 or 4 times a year when we've got visitors, because obviously what you're doing is burning a limited stock of hardwood. We are releasing carbon, we're releasing pollutants into the atmosphere that in some places more than others, you can get inversions, you can get smog, you can get respiratory issues. So we shouldn't really be burning timber anymore, apart from maybe just the occasional situation. We shouldn't be relying on it. That's the point. And as Jane has said, and Jenny confirmed, we should be looking at localized electrical supply for everything. Because if you have your 6 kilowatt, whatever, solar on the rooftop, or you share it with neighbors, or you buy green energy, different ways, different cost places where you are absolutely minimizing the impact wider, and yet you're getting the personal warmth benefit, which is, of course, essentially what we're all doing it all for.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really great to be touching on this topic, because I'm sure some of our viewers who really are very new to the whole idea of sustainable design might not have heard this movement, I guess, that that we are much more familiar with, which is, get off gas at home. Gas used to be sold as the sort of the cheap, environmentally friendly. I'm not quite sure where they got that from, but it was sold as the cheap, environmentally friendly option.
But just put the word natural before it, and then,
yeah. So gas is a fossil fuel and always will be. Electricity can be generated through renewable sources. Our electricity grid is becoming more and more renewable all the time, and you can always choose to purchase green power to assist that process. So getting off gas and going electric at home is definitely a great goal to have.
And I've got to plug at that point, and I have to plug My Efficient Electric Home, the Facebook group that I used to admin. It's now 60,000 plus members, lots of people sharing tips and tricks all around the country. So check that out too. It's another great resource. Yeah,
for sure. And things like systems like heat pump hot water services and so forth are becoming more readily available and more affordable slowly. And so it is becoming a lot easier, a lot more within more people's reach, financial reach, to actually make the switch to an all electric home. And can I just say, how good is induction cooking if you haven't tried it?
Great. Don't believe anyone who tells you it isn't. My house, my family home here, 3-bedroom plus multi-room, 2-bathroom home, all electric. I've got a 3 kilowatt slice of Canberra's community solar farm. It offsets the entire consumption here in Canberra, where we go from -8 to 44 degrees. So it can be done. Don't listen to anyone who says it can't.
Yeah, great. Okay, next question. Getting back to the budget question, what are some ways to work towards sustainable housing when we have a really tight budget? Specified whether we're talking about new builds or retrofits, but
is it new build or
not sure.
If you're wanting to build a new home, I'd have to say, considering how big it is, you're probably your number one power there in terms of managing your budget.
Yeah,
and then the complexity of
smaller.
The complexity of it as well. You can build very expensive small homes as well.
Yes.
The complexity in there, the level of finish, the appliances, the technology that's pumped into that can make it a very high square meter rate. So size and complexity, considering what you need it to be enough, is the best way that you could manage a smaller budget. And the thing is, sometimes, and can be a really hard truth for some people, sometimes the budget is just too small for what they want to do. And that's where you need to go, okay, well, why am I doing this? What is it I want to achieve? And what is my best avenue to get there?
Yeah.
Well, can I say, I often have to advocate staged building for exactly clients like that. You know, the young couple with a young child come along saying, I want the palace. And apart from saying, do you really want or need a palace? Apart from all those niceties, it really comes down to, okay, with the starter home, because that will be relatively expensive, because you're going to have your sewer, you're going to have your water supply, you're going to have your energy, you're going to have a kitchen, you're going to have a bathroom. Adding more bedrooms or more spaces later, that's the cheaper end of construction. But if you've got a narrow block of land, you don't have the later stuff at the rear where you can never get to. Okay, so again, it comes back to clever design, working out what's livable now for the next, should we say, 3, 5, 7 years, and knowing that when you get more money, when you get that job promotion, whatever, then you can add, and that's the way you will do it. So it's pre-planned, pre-designed in.
Yeah, and I think one of the things to remember is, you don't have to have it all now and straight away. Homes are almost a living being thing with us. So as we grow and develop, as our families change, the home can grow with you and to accommodate that. And yeah, as what Nigel said, what do you need right now? And considering, well, what are the boundaries there for you? It's become a bit of a norm that every child has their own bedroom. Is that really what you need at this point in time? It's not very long ago that no one had their own bedroom.
Sure.
A whole family of 5 is in one bedroom. So we've come a very long way in what we think we need and what's enough in a very short amount of time. And I think that status quo and general narrative is tripping us up sometimes, because we're being conditioned to think, if I'm going to do this, I need to have that. We don't have to. I give everyone permission to not do that.
It's the point of marketing, where the real estate industry, the project home companies, the appliance companies are endlessly saying, this is what you need. You can spend $35,000 and you get all these fantastic kitchen appliances in one package. Now, how much will you use? Is it really needed? And of course, I've had the irony of the relatively well-off client that said, oh, look, I'll just get an IKEA kitchen. I need to keep it down. Oh, but I must have the $35,000 worth of, appliances. And again, that disconnect. As professionals, we have to ever so nicely try and bring them back to some modicum of reality.
Yeah, spend the money on the things that are going to make a big difference to the efficiency and the thermal comfort of the house, and that are hard to retrofit later. Is a mantra that I hear often.
And
not on the granite bench tops.
No.
Insulation.
Yeah, well, but insulation doesn't cost much. I say spend it on this good advice, and that's where people are often reluctant to invest in the expertise of architects. And I encourage you all, it's worth it. Your home will be better, it will be healthier, it will be more joyful, it will cost less to run, if you pick the right sort of architects. It's a really, really sound investment. It sounds scary, because people are not, again, in Australia, we're not used to that, but it makes sense.
And also be aware that when you're on a tight budget, or any budget, being open to spending a little bit more upfront on a better designed house that is going to reduce your running costs is a sensible decision if you can. If you can come up with a little bit more money at the time.
But that's Jenny's point. Get the right advice early. That's relatively cheap, because you end up spending so many hundreds of thousands of dollars. What you don't know when you get your builder's price is he or she is going to charge 15, 18, 20, 25% profit and overheads. Okay, that's wrapped up in a price. They're not going to separate out for you. So your architect, your building designer, what are they charging? 5%, 7%, 10%, depending on what the service is. It's cost value, as distinct from just leaving it to others who have a vested interest in pushing the price
it bigger.
Exactly. That's one of the fundamental problems in Australian construction. The bigger the profit margin.
Somebody asked which issue of Sanctuary, the home with the retractable wall and the multifunction living room was. It was in Sanctuary 60. It was an article called Sunshine After Rain, about a house in Tasmania. It's not online yet, I'm afraid. It will be at some point, but in the meantime, get your hands on a copy of Sanctuary 60, which is the current issue. So you should be able to find it in newsagents. And your comment about bedrooms, Jane, reminded me of another house that we profiled a while back in Perth, which I loved, which had 2 bedrooms, 2/3 bedrooms. There was a main bedroom, and then there was another bedroom, which was quite big, but it had 2 doors into it, and it had 2 windows on the far side, and it had a movable wall. And I just thought that was so clever, because when they had 2 tiny children, they had them in the bigger part of that room, and the smaller part was a little study or something like that. And then when the kids got bigger, they moved the wall into the middle, and they had 2 equal-sized bedrooms, and the wall was completely removable as well.
Cool creative stuff can be done. Movable furniture, heavy curtains,
Yes.
just sharing space. I mean, kids sharing space is great for, learning conflict resolution, boundaries, learning to go and find some space outside if you need some time to yourself. I know they might not sound high-tech kind of things, but I think it's part of, we need to be considering those things in life, because they're the things that are going to contribute to our experiences and how we're feeling. And how we're feeling, we want to, well-being is important to be nurturing now as well.
Yeah.
Social sustainability within the family, within the household.
Yes. And flexibility, getting back to my flexible design.
I'm always also a really bit of a fan of bunk beds as well. I don't know why. We've done a number of projects with bunk beds, and kids, they're fun for kids. I mean, I know there'll be a point in time where children will want more of their own space, and that's where a professional can really help you plan for that. Thinking about the different stages of your family and your life, and the future uses of your house. We've got to remember that any house, whether it's existing and you're going to improve it, or something that you're going to create from scratch, isn't going to be yours forever. Someone else is going to use that. Hopefully, that's the plan. Someone else should use it. So, thinking about that, and how can things be easily, I guess, flexible for the next users.
Yeah. So getting back a little bit to the sort of nuts and bolts of sustainable design and performance, David has asked, what are the main considerations when deciding whether to go light and tight, by which he means lightweight and airtight, as opposed to mass and glass, thermal mass and glazing? Or can designs incorporate both these aspects?
Climate, location, fundamental. Because Jenny will tell us more in a moment, I'm sure, and Jane has it all too. But obviously, thermal mass is important to moderate temperature fluctuations day, night, weeks, months in temperate climates. But once you head north, or head to some degree west across Australia, you actually don't want to have the super high temperatures. And think about many traditional outback homes where they had the stone cottage with a roof, and then they had their sleeping quarters, the fly screen around the outside. So early in the day, it would be cool inside the dark, heavy mass. And as time went on through the day, it would get hotter and hotter. And then they moved to the perimeter. They moved into the garden. They spent time under the tree and slept in the sleep out behind fly screens. So it depends. You can have that in your house, depending on what your climate is. You can have part of thermal mass to heat up and cool down slowly. And then another part, if you've got a big day-night variation, which is very much related to the outdoor temperature. It's a design for climate. It's relatively straightforward to a good professional.
Yeah. I would stress too, again, coming back to renovation, which is the majority of our work now, that here in the ACT, a lot of our existing housing stock that has good bones, it's all suspended timber. And you can, even in a climate like the ACT, you can make light and tight work. We've taken plenty of existing houses up above 7 stars, getting close to 8 even. And the trick to that again is size. So if for light and tight to work in colder climate, a small volume is much easier to make it work. So don't, again, dismiss, if you're looking to renovate a house, don't dismiss it because it doesn't have thermal mass. You can massively improve them and make them perform much, much more efficiently. But yeah, if you're going new, we typically typically have thermal mass in the slab. I find that we don't need additional mass in internal walls in our climate, the way we design to really optimise for that solar access in winter. So don't think you have to have heaps of it. Again, you can work with your architect and your energy assessor to check out what's sort of optimal, because there is a cost benefit thing, because the more internal masonry or mass, it will cost you a bit more. But yeah,
it's pretty tricky to retrofit into existing lightweight houses too.
I actually looked at it
Possible,
hard.
but hard.
Yeah, and I just made the decision it wasn't worth it in terms of bang for buck.
Yeah.
I think your site is going to play a big part in that decision too. Some sites, if they're particularly steep, are just not going to lend themselves to certain types of construction, particularly potentially a slab on ground.
Yeah.
And so the mass, you can consider where the mass is. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the slab. That is a great place to put it, but your site will dictate that. So that decision is something that conditions of your site, your budget, will determine. So yeah, it's something that's lots of things will impact, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
This makes me think of a house designed probably 15 years ago by Rick Lepastrier, Australia's gold medal winning architect of the time. I took the Blue Mounts Eco home tour there a couple of times, because what they did was, to a tight budget, a simple rectangle facing north for obvious solar reasons, and he put because it's elevated because of the fall of land, he put a rammed earth wall right through the middle with a couple of apertures to bedrooms on the south, living, kitchen on the north, and then had solar on the roof to make sure the sun was shining onto the rammed earth wall through the middle of the house, and then super insulated round the timber frame to keep it warm. So again, it was simple, it was elegant, beautifully detailed, but it worked, and it didn't have to cost a bomb. And it was a sloping site, had to have a timber floor, yes, insulated underneath, but again, it was a point of good design for climate, orientation, the right materials in the right sequence.
I'm just going to say something about the glass bit of, what was it? Mass and glass.
Mass and glass.
You don't need as much glass as you think you do,
right? One of my favourite
topics. Jenny will talk about more of this, but for for passive solar design to work, it's probably less than a lot of people consider, and more glass is only going to lose more heat when there is no sun as well. So it works in the opposite direction as letting sun in as it does letting heat out. So yes, that is a balancing act, and it's often a lot less than you reckon.
Absolutely. Australian houses are typically overglazed, and there's this misconception when we talk about solar passive design to think anything that faces north can and should be glass. And as Jane just said, you can really go way too far. I've got a lovely blog where I rant about it, and I use one of our projects as an example. All our projects like this, our projects have less glass than your typical new home, but they don't feel like that because we've thought very hard about where the glass is and the connection to outdoors. But thermally they do better, because as well as losing that heat in the middle of on a winter night out that glass, in summer, even if you've shaded it properly, you still get that conductive gain through the glass, because glass will transfer, the heat will transfer through glass at least 6 times faster, and that's double glazing, than an insulated wall alongside. So they're really holes in the building envelope. So you have to think carefully. And we haven't talked about shading too much. External shading of your glass over summer is critical to your house's performance. We've all just assumed everyone understands that. But we've got to shade.
That's right.
It's more about where you put the glazing than the amount of it, I'd have. Jenny, really considering where is it going to be of most benefit. It also helps with your budget control, but also making the house work as you want it to work.
Yeah, and particularly make sure that you don't have windows that extend too high up under the eaves to places where they're never going to get sun in winter, because that means that portion of the glass is only ever going to leach heat for you in winter and not gain it. And things like optimizing the size and position of glazing is one thing that doing possibly more than one energy rating in the design process is going to help you fine tune. But your designer should be all over that.
Can I suggest that the priorities generally across most of Australia would be predominance of glazing to the north. You minimise east and west, because when the sun is low in the sky, 5 a.m. in high summer, the sun is rising. And if you've got big eastern glazing, the sun is spending many hours low in the sky, coming underneath your eave and superheating early in the day. Similarly to the west in so much of Australia, if you've got big windows, you are going to overheat, even if you've got good energy efficient glass, because the sun is tracking slowly across the sky. South, you minimize your glazing because you don't get no thermal benefit from it, but you may have a view, who knows, but it's more cross ventilation, because you look at the path of cooling ventilation in warm climates or warm seasons, and you look at the ratio of the opening size where you're getting the cool air or cooler air in, maybe across water to cool it down. Maybe even I've done houses where we've had buried pipes 2 meters or more underground to bring cool air up into the house, to then have a high opening so that automatically you control your relativity, you create airflow even on still days. So again, this is a point of building science and good design and the mixture, and checking with Jenny about what should that ratio be.
Checking with Jenny. We're all going to come and check with you, Jenny.
Yes, Jenny.
Somebody has asked a question that I have been meaning to touch on as well. We've been talking a lot about passive solar design. And John has asked, what are the main differences between passive solar and passive house design? I know none of you are huge passive house experts, but if somebody could just give us a quick, because people are going to be wanting to know.
Yeah,
what, where passive house with a capital P and a capital H fits in with this discussion.
Yeah, look, I think anyone designing a passive house in Australia should still be employing solar passive principles. You know, you've still got to work with the climate, you've still got to think about the sun, you've still got to shade in summer. So be alarmed if someone's telling you your passive house can deliver fantastic things without considering solar passive design. They absolutely should work together, and the vast majority of passive house accredited people have that attitude. So I'm not saying they're
not mutually exclusive at all.
No, not at all, not at all. But the difference with passive house is they meet more stringent standards. So I air leakage test and I thermal image and I use building sites. I actually came back from the US, a huge passive house advocate in 2008, but I've taken a slightly different approach. But you can go for a very high level of air tightness, and to achieve that you have to alter the construction slightly, and you have to have an internal air barrier membrane, which changes the construction of the wall and adds some complexity and therefore cost. And they tend to have higher insulation levels and pay more attention to thermal bridging than I do, for example, in the way we design. So some might say that the way I design is a bit of a compromise. So I use building science, but I've gone for what I think is maximum bang for buck. I'm not anti-passive house at all, but people do need to be aware that it does cost more because there's more involved. There's more stuff that goes into the house, and the complexity is higher.
And because of the focus on extremely high air tightness, they also require mechanical ventilation systems.
Yeah, but I should say that with standard construction, our houses are actually getting down to the level where they need
pretty close.
So I've written some articles for Sanctuary and Renew about that.
Can I say I'm somewhat cynical about passive house, in that, as Jenny said, most of the benefit you can get from passive solar design. Okay, we have that climate that works to it. Now, the whole passive house movement came from Europe, where they don't have the sun, they don't have the equitable climate, they have enclosed buildings with orientation all over the place. Now, we don't need that as an everyday matter. In some cases, yes, certainly. Yes, it could be an optional extra, but again, I'm old enough and have been around long enough to say, hang on, it's the latest great new thing that everyone's jumping on board. It's not an answer unless you want to live in an enclosed house that don't open the windows and doors and not interacting with outside. Yes, it's been useful. It is good when it comes to condensation control, moisture movement. That science is very helpful even to everyday solar homes. But it is not an alternative that I believe is suitable for most houses in Australia. We can use nature without using constant gizmos and an extra 15, 18, 20% in building costs, which is what I'm told by a local passive house builder. That's what it's actually costing, over and above common building costs. We can get more bang for your buck, as Jenny said, by doing the simple traditional things and adding a bit of extra gizmos, bit of technology if you want. It's not an alternative.
And you can still use the building science. You can still have an air leakage test. You can still do some thermal imaging. You can still do the modelling. Building science did exist before passive house. It's not. Yeah.
I think the main advantage of passive house that I see is that it is actually a post-build tested standard, and so the builders are required to work to actually build to what is to the design. Yes,
like to build a standard just to.
That's true.
That's a reasonable one. Yeah,
absolutely. But many builders just build and then hand it over. So the passive house standard is actually a kind of a it's a post tested, and it's not the only way to do it. Of course, Jenny, I know you do it too. But that's an appealing thing to many people, I think.
Absolutely.
I have to say, I agree with a lot of the points that you made there, Nigel. I think if we're thinking about sustainability as a whole and the balance of that, financial sustainability and increasing the overall quality of our built environment is a really important thing to think about. Passive house is much more expensive and it's not accessible to most people. It's, so if we think about the accessibility of sustainable design, our whole built environment, it's a very kind of niche thing that, and if we bring in the idea of embodied energy, which is a whole nother area, not energy that the house is using, it's the materials and everything that's going into that and where the materials are coming from. If you add that into the mix, there's a lot of other things to think about. So building health, on the other side of things, there's things like hempcrete and natural materials that can also really achieve a lot of these goals as well, that might not attract the embodied energy that some other building types do.
We won't go too far down this particular rabbit hole tonight, because next week, in the second of our series in this series, Sustainable Design 101, we're going to be talking about low energy homes, including both passive solar and passive house. So I'd encourage anybody who's interested in going further into that particular topic to tune in again next week. So I've got time for just a couple more questions, probably, if everyone's still got steam in the boilers. Nigel, you wanted to say something?
I was just going to add up from what Jane said. Perhaps we should explain embodied energy, Jane, and a little bit more about healthy house.
Oh, okay. Super quick, Anna?
Yeah, go for it. Yep.
Okay, so embodied energy is the energy that is used to create the house in the first place. So that's materials have an embodied energy, and that is contributed by what they're made from, where they've come from, how far they've traveled, and what's the process in making them. So, as this whole industry is starting to really consider our carbon and the energy that houses are using once they're built, I think the embodied energy is going to become a much bigger discussion point, because it's going to be contributing a much higher percentage of the energy of the built environment overall. So embodied energy is the energy that's needed to make the materials in the first place. So on our website, we've got some information about embodied energy, if anyone wants to look at more of that. Healthy homes and healthy houses is about, I guess, breathability, the chemicals that you're exposed to when you're in there, the materials, how close they are to the natural state. So there's a lot of differences in that. And there's some materials that are very close to the natural state that are naturally breathable, but they are still providing the benefits of thermal mass, for example, and insulation. And they also have really low embodied energy, which is reducing the overall carbon emissions of the built environment.
And it's interesting, I've seen a really big shift just in the last 2 years in Canberra, of people being interested in embodied energy in addition to operational energy. So that it's really gaining momentum. And we've had maybe that's because there's been a competition for the last 2 years in the ACT, encouraging architects to look specifically at embodied energy as well. And it's really and that it really helps to sell that message too about smaller houses. People start to appreciate, of course, if the house is smaller, there is less stuff.
Another thing about embodied energy, which is this is a big something that hit home to me that I read a little while back, is that in privileged nations like Australia, we're using on average 28 tonnes of material and resources per person per year. Now, that doesn't mean a lot if we just say that, but it's actually, ecologists have estimated that 8 tonnes per person per year is the amount of natural material and resources that the planet can safely support. So, with the bigger houses that Nigel mentioned before, we're building really, really big houses in Australia. We're using 3.5 times the amount of material that the planet can naturally support. Now, that's meaning that there's other nations and less privileged countries that are having much lower share in that. So just by building something smaller and considering the complexity and the materials going into that, it can have a really fundamental impact on our overall impact on our planet.
Yeah, and it's another argument for where possible and where sensible, retrofitting and renovating existing houses as opposed to building new ones or pushing houses over and building new ones. Make the most of the embodied energy and the materials you've already got there in your house if you can.
And get a good designer to do it.
We haven't actually really talked about materials much at all tonight, but materials and material choice for your build or your renovation is a really key consideration for sustainability. And there are many different elements to the sustainability of a material because it's to a certain extent, every single material is going to be a trade-off, and it's going to depend on your personal values to a certain degree as well. Whether you consider low maintenance and durability more important, or whether you consider renewable source more important. Recycled materials are terrific from many sustainability points of view, but take more time and effort to work into, or can take more time and effort to work into a new building, for example. So there's lots of different elements to the sustainability of building materials, and that's something that definitely bears consideration, and a good architect and designer can help you with as well.
Well, 20, 30 years ago, we had Bill Lawson talking about embodied energy. We talk about life cycle analysis. Now we're looking at embodied carbon in terms of the progression of the sustainability argument. So it's not just the amount of material that is won in terms of the amount of earth turned over to be able to exploit that bit of aggregate, to use that to turn it into steel with enormous energy, or the limestone crushed and cindered at 1,200-1,300 degrees to become cement, which is something like 5 or 6% of the world's total CO2 consequences, just making cement. So if you're into this seriously, that is the kind of thing that you look at in terms of sustainability. But the further current argument, of which every 6 months there's more information about what's the carbon consequence of that, not just the pollutant consequence, not just the energy, but we're in a carbon constrained world where we actually should be trying to reduce our carbon burden at every level, be it the vehicle, be it the bicycle, be it our houses. And yes, smaller is better, but also which materials will have less consequence. And as Jane alluded to earlier, 9 times out of 10, the more natural the material, the less processed the material, the better it is, both for energy, for embodied energy, even for health. So yeah, I suggest that's one of the fundamentals, that if you're truly trying to be sustainable, look at the natural organic materials first and foremost, not the highly processed, not the stuff exported around the world, local.
Local is good, yeah, absolutely. Circling back to where we started, Abigail has submitted this comment and question. She says, I love ideas about enoughness and least house necessary. However, what do you suggest for someone who's purchased a house that's too big? Do you demolish the extra rooms? How can these strategies that you're talking about translate into a renovation of an existing home?
Turn it into 2 homes.
Yeah.
Share it.
Yeah, honestly,
Share it.
we've done it several times. It's great because you get the bonus of that social sustainability. You can share a great big veggie garden. You can share a car. You can do all sorts of things. But do really investigate that, because there's so much potential in so many existing larger homes to do that, or even smaller homes. As I said, we do it in smaller ones as well, which is sorry, this is sort of beside the additional point. We didn't with renovations talk about how I think a lot of people, when they come to renovate or retrofit, assume they have to do this great big, usually a rectangle out the back of the house to improve their home. Often, again, there's a massive potential to work within the existing footprint by employing all the strategies that architects are so good at, reconfiguring things, having multi-use spaces, having great storage. So often you don't need a smaller house. If you've purchased a smaller house, often you don't need to extend it very much at all. But if you have purchased a larger house, yeah, seriously look at splitting it into 2, whether it's 2 evenly sized ones or a larger one and a smaller one. Lots of opportunities.
Or if that particular situation doesn't sit well with you, or if that you're not comfortable with it, you might like to maybe look into how is that extra space, could they be transition spaces, or not quite inside it but not quite outside spaces that could bring a lot of value to your life, that aren't going to take a lot of extra energy or material to turn into really usable spaces. There's a lot of transition spaces that can provide a lot of function and fun. Fun's a good thing to think about in your home as well. And you don't have to rebuild it, or as I said, put a lot of energy or time or material into it.
And I suggest that a common thing is that people want to renovate their kitchens, their bathrooms, things like that, because they're old, they're tired, and they want to do whatever. 9 times out of 10, that's the starting point to reorganize the floor plan of the house, because you might be able to make, for example, a smaller kitchen by knocking out a dividing wall. You might get better facilities if you need or want to update in that area, because if you keep your wet areas close together, it's inherently cheaper and more sustainable than just, as was suggested, just keep on building more and more and more. So I mentioned at the beginning my daughter's house, where there was an extra toilet, WC, with a hand basin, not needed. So that's about to become the kitchenette in the secondary dwelling. Okay, so we cut down the wall, all the plumbing and the electrics are there, so we can very readily make that into a kitchenette for a two-room separate dwelling on what had been a 4-bedroom house, unneeded as 4-bedroom. So again, design innovation, thinking things through, that's what architects, building designers do well.
And designing to be able to age in place is an important consideration as well. And one thing that can support that is to have space for a carer to live close by, but separately in the future. So that's another consideration for another use possibility for a bigger house that's been divided into 2, or that could be divided into, is designed so that it could be divided into 2 down the track, which is a feature that another clever feature that I see in some of the houses I particularly like the Sanctuary. So we're just about coming to the end of our time tonight, folks. 2 whole hours. It's a marathon. Does anybody have any final comments that they'd like to contribute on? Getting back to the topic that we started on, which was what is sustainable design and where should I start? What are your key takeaways?
Smaller.
I really think all of this is wrapped up into what is enough. What's enough for you? What do you really need? Because if you consider that, then all the decisions following that are going to probably have sustainability in mind. So yeah, enoughness is my do that well. Yep.
And I use the term to minimise. What's the minimum you can live well by maximising the benefit of every space, every interaction? I mean, I love the permaculture thing. Make sure there's always multiple benefits from every interaction. So that should be a fundamental, whatever we do. We're not just thinking in a narrow single way. We're looking at multiple benefits in design, in construction, in the type of glazing we use, in our orientation, in our connection inside to outside.
Yep, absolutely. I think that's the 3 very neat summings up there.
And one last pitch for the sun. Think about the sun.
Yeah. Light. What was it, Jenny? Light,
warmth, good social spaces, and connection to outdoors. They're the 4 things most humans seem to want in a home, and it makes sense.
Yep. And make sure that you design just enough of them and no more.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's all the time we have tonight. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks so much, Jane, Jenny, and Nigel, for sharing your time and expertise. And thank you to all our attendees for tuning into this Sustainable House Day session. And for all your questions, I hope we got to answer yours. I'm sorry if we didn't. There are 3 more sessions in this series coming up, so please visit the Sustainable House Day website to check out the details and register if you'd like to tune in, as well as checking out our other events coming up. You can buy tickets for individual events or discounted series passes. And we've also introduced an annual pass for all Sustainable House Day events, which means each event costs around just $3. Don't forget, members of Renew receive free or discounted tickets, and we always have an allocation of free places for those experiencing financial difficulty. And a quick plug from me for Sanctuary. If you're not already a subscriber, or if you have someone in your life who just love reading about sustainable design 4 times a year, we'd love it if you'd jump online at sanctuary.renew.org.au and sign up for a gift or a subscription. Thank you again, everybody, and good night.